Waking up to find that the world's largest asset managers have just filed to buy billions of dollars worth of your favorite altcoins sounds like an ultimate catalyst for the greatest altcoin season in history. Right now, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission is sitting on a staggering 126 pending cryptocurrency exchange-traded fund applications, which some say represent the final regulatory green light for decentralized finance. But buried beneath the excitement of massive fiat inflows is a structural mechanism designed to quietly strip away the foundational voting rights of these decentralized networks. My name is Lewis, and you're watching the Coin Bureau. To understand the sheer scale of the institutional capital preparing to enter the altcoin space, we have to look at the regulatory floodgates that were opened late last year. In September 2025, the SEC approved generic listing standards that allowed major exchanges to list commodity-based cryptocurrency products without requiring individual rule changes for every single new token. But the true catalyst occurred on March 17, 2026, when the SEC and the CFTC issued a landmark joint interpretation formally classifying 16 major cryptocurrencies as digital commodities. This new token taxonomy explicitly removed the primary securities law barriers for assets including Solana, XRP, Cardano, Avalanche, and Polkadot. By the end of that historic week, pipeline of pending cryptocurrency ETF applications had swelled to at least 126 active filings. Major financial institutions like BlackRock, Grayscale, Bitwise, and Canary Capital are no longer just focused on Bitcoin and Ethereum. They are actively pursuing regulated wrappers for decentralized finance protocols like Aave, Uniswap, Sui, and Near. Just days ago, on March 20th, Grayscale officially filed for a spot ETF tracking decentralized perpetual exchange Hyperliquid's HYPE token. No doubt because the protocol processed a staggering $2.6 trillion in trading volume throughout 2025. So, the mainstream narrative surrounding this explosive pipeline is undeniably bullish for short-term price action, and it is easy to see why. Retail investors are cheering because institutional access means massive fiat inflows into altcoins that possess a fraction of Bitcoin's total liquidity. To put this institutional purchasing power into perspective, BlackRock's spot Bitcoin ETF has already accumulated over $55 billion in assets under management. Across all of its cryptocurrency exchange-traded products, BlackRock now controls a mind-boggling $130 billion in digital assets. When you take that level of institutional buying power and point it at an asset like Solana, which is currently sitting 65.5% below its all-time high, well, the price implications are enormous. We've already seen Canary Capital's newly launched HBAR ETF manage to absorb approximately 1.3% of the entire circulating supply within its first few months of trading. The market is aggressively pricing in the exact legal safe harbor that institutional treasuries and pension funds have been waiting for. But the mainstream narrative is completely ignoring the mechanical reality of how these specific funds actually operate behind the scenes. Because while the headlines focus entirely on the incoming liquidity injection, they are missing the massive centralization trap hidden inside the custody architecture. And here's exactly how this structural governance mechanism actually works. Unlike Bitcoin, where miners secure the network and holding the asset grants you absolutely no direct protocol control, the majority of altcoins seeking ETF status use proof-of-stake consensus and governance tokens. These decentralized governance tokens grant their holders the direct right to vote on protocol upgrades, treasury spending, fee structure modifications, and collateral risk parameters. Put simply, the one token, one vote model dictates that whoever holds the largest token positions ultimately holds the most governance power over the future of the entire network. But when a retail investor purchases shares in an ETF, they do not actually hold the underlying cryptocurrency in their own wallet. The ETF sponsors hold the underlying tokens through a centralized corporate custodian like Coinbase Prime or Anchorage Digital. Now, these massive ETF issuers do not pass the governance voting rights through to the individual retail shareholders who provide the capital. If you read the official prospectus for BlackRock's newly launched ETH B-staked Ethereum Trust, the document focuses heavily on custody security, but remains explicitly silent on the matter of governance voting. Instead, the prospectus reveals that the fund will stake between 70 to 95% of its entire Ethereum holdings to generate yield. The validator roster for the massive staked position is selected entirely by Coinbase and BlackRock, completely bypassing the actual investors who own the shares. This means that millions of retail investors are effectively surrendering their decentralized voting rights and funneling them directly into a giant Wall Street ballot box. To understand the mathematical reality of this concentration risk, you only need to look at the current Ethereum ETF landscape. BlackRock and Fidelity currently hold an estimated 3.86 million ETH across their spot products. If those assets were fully staked under the new ETF structures, it would represent approximately 18% of the total ETH staking market centralized under a single custodial umbrella. When the liquid staking provider Lido approached a 32% market share in previous years, the Ethereum community sounded the alarm regarding existential systemic risk. But these new Wall Street exchange-traded funds face absolutely no equivalent pressure, meaning they can continue to grow and centralize power without any limits. And speaking of tracking these institutional power grabs before they rewrite the rules of your favorite cryptocurrency, well, this is exactly why you need the Coin Bureau weekly newsletter. This is where our research team breaks down these dense regulatory filings and highlights the hidden clauses that the mainstream media completely misses. We provide deep dive analysis and give you the most important market updates delivered straight into your inbox for free. So sign up today using the link down below or by simply scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen. And now back to the terrifying reality of institutional governance capture. You might think that large asset managers will simply remain passive and refuse to actively participate in decentralized protocol governance. But the historical on-chain data proves that concentrated token holdings inevitably lead to protocol manipulation and hostile corporate takeovers. According to comprehensive governance research conducted across over 200 decentralized autonomous organizations in 2025, the centralization metrics are already flashing red. The data shows that the top 10% of holders currently control more than 76% of the total voting power across these protocols. When you combine this massive wealth concentration with an average voter turnout of less than 17%, well, the vulnerability becomes painfully obvious. A well-resourced institutional whale only needs to mobilize a tiny fraction of the circulating supply to pass controversial proposals and extract value. And we've already seen exactly what happens when centralized entities use custodial assets to capture network governance without user consent. Cast your mind back to the infamous Steem and Tron hostile takeover that occurred in early 2020. During that event, major centralized exchanges, including Binance and Huobi, used the Steem tokens deposited in their users' accounts to vote in a governance election. They weaponized their clients' assets to replace the elected network validators with accounts controlled by Justin Sun, effectively handing control of the blockchain to a single centralized entity. While the exchange executives later apologized publicly and blamed the incident on a miscommunication, the protocol governance had already been permanently captured. This is not a theoretical vulnerability, because custodians have already demonstrated their willingness to use retail funds to alter decentralized consensus. We saw a similar dynamic unfold during the Compound DAO governance attack in July of 2024, which resulted in massive financial extraction. The coordinated group of investors accumulated a significant voting power through delegation and pushed through a proposal to allocate $24 million of protocol tokens into a yield-bearing product that they personally controlled. These events perfectly illustrate the rule of three for institutional protocol capture. They capture the supply, they capture the votes, and finally, they capture the network. And the conflict of interest at the absolute heart of this ETF avalanche is glaringly incompatible with decentralized infrastructure. Firms like BlackRock are legally bound by a strict fiduciary duty to maximize financial returns for the corporate shareholders above all else. They have absolutely no fiduciary duty to uphold the censorship resistance protocol, neutrality, or cypherpunk ethos of the underlying blockchain network. In fact, BlackRock has already directly purchased Uniswap governance tokens to facilitate its tokenized fund operations on the Uniswap X platform. This marks a massive transition from providing passive price exposure to taking an active participation role in decentralized finance governance to benefit their own corporate products. The mainstream narrative assumes that the recent digital commodity classifications are a permanent shield against governance overreach and regulatory enforcement. But here is where the true existential danger of this institutional accumulation becomes apparent. Because the very ETF mechanism that retail investors are currently cheering for could ultimately trigger the retroactive destruction of the entire industry. To understand this regulatory doom loop, we have to look closely at the foundational legal framework known as the Howey test. Under the Howey test, an asset is classified as an illegal unregistered security if there is an expectation of profit derived primarily from the efforts of others. The primary legal argument protecting cryptos like ETH and SOL from being classified as securities is the established doctrine of sufficient decentralization. This doctrine argues that because no single entity controls the network, purchasers are not relying on the managerial or entrepreneurial efforts of centralized corporate enterprise. But legal experts have long warned about the concept of a morphing token, which suggests that an asset's legal status can fundamentally change over time. If a token can morph from a security into a commodity through progressive decentralization, well, it can absolutely morph back into a security if that decentralization is permanently lost. If ETF issuers accumulate enough staked supply to materially control protocol upgrades, validator selection, and treasury decisions, the legal landscape fundamentally shifts against the industry. The SEC could easily observe this concentration and argue that the network is now effectively managed by a centralized corporate enterprise like BlackRock or Coinbase. This would retroactively trigger a securities classification, destroying the utility of the protocol and subjecting it to crushing federal compliance costs that stifle all permissionless innovation. We know the SEC is willing to use this exact enforcement logic because during their action against Telegram's TON token, they successfully argued that the project functioned entirely as a centralized securities offering. The legal precedent established during the Ripple lawsuit also demonstrated that the identity of the entity controlling the flow of tokens matters enormously to the final legal classification. If an ETF sponsor becomes the centralized manager of a protocol's direction, they become the exact centralized party that the Howey test was explicitly designed to capture. And this brings us to the irony at the center of this entire institutional adoption phase the market is currently experiencing. The developers building these networks are desperately trying to build decentralized defenses, while retail investors actively cheer for Wall Street to buy the administrative control panel. On March 13, 2026, the Ethereum Foundation published a massive 38-page mandate officially declaring Ethereum a sanctuary technology. This document explicitly positioned the network as an escape hatch from centralized control, coercion, and corporate domination. Even Vitalik Buterin has explicitly warned that growing Wall Street involvement could distort the blockchain's governance over time and create highly vulnerable centralized choke points. The creators of the technology are aggressively sounding the alarm about institutional capture, while the broader market blindly celebrates the filing of 126 new corporate ETF wrappers. Retail participants are actively handing over their voting rights to traditional finance in exchange for a temporary fiat liquidity pump that threatens their long-term survival. So, what's the verdict on this unprecedented wave of institutional cryptocurrency products? On one hand, the incoming wave of 126 altcoin ETFs will inject massive fiat liquidity into the market. The recent commodity classifications provide a meaningful regulatory moat that allows institutional capital to allocate without immediate fear of enforcement actions. On the other hand, the long-term structural cost of this institutional adoption is genuinely worrying for the future of decentralized finance. By handing our tokens over to Wall Street custodians in exchange for a temporary price bump, we are systematically surrendering the voting rights of the decentralized web. We are allowing asset managers with strict corporate fiduciary duties to subtly capture the consensus layers and treasury mechanisms of our most important global protocols. And by centralizing the management of these networks, we are practically inviting the SEC to retroactively classify them as unregistered securities in the future. We're actively cheering as traditional finance buys the control panel to our financial revolution. But what do you think about this massive institutional shift? Are altcoin ETFs a necessary evil for long-term price appreciation, or are they a fatal threat to the foundational ethos of decentralization? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you want to understand how BlackRock is specifically targeting Ethereum's staking layer to extract network yield, well, check out our video on that right over here. And if you want to learn more about how institutional custody is reshaping the broader cryptocurrency supply, you could check out our video on that right over here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. This is Lewis, signing off.